Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Patriot's History of the United States. I'm Larry Schweikart. I'm going to be doing what we're going to do now for the next couple of years, and that's read through a Patriot's History of the United States with my commentary, expanded analysis, new sources, whatever it is we're going to give you. You'll get it all right here. Reminder, my website is wildworldhistory.com, and there's all sorts of free stuff there. So check in to wildworldhistory.com if you want to see all sorts of historical vignettes. We have a VIP subscription that has ongoing 4 or 5 lesson programs that are unrelated to the curriculum. Of course, I have a full curriculum in U.S. history and world history for high schoolers, homeschoolers, educators that come with teacher's guide, student guide, tests, and me teaching all of the units in high production video for both U.S. history and for our course in world history since 1775. U.S. history, of course, is tied to a Patriot's History of the United States, 22 lessons, 22 chapters, 22 video lessons by me teaching Patriot's History. World history is 15 lessons. They're kind of larger because some parts of the world are larger. And 15 video lessons, teacher's guides, student guides. The second part, these are each, I should say, 1-year courses, and the second semester of world history uses my Patriot's History of the Modern World, Volume 1 and 2. There's a lot of reading in the second semester world history, and that's why we recommend you have students do U.S. History 1 and 2 first, then World History 1 and 2. So check it out, thewildworldofhistory.com. And if you're a political junkie, I am splitting the site into the Wild World of History and the Wild World of Politics. And so following this show, just hop over to Locals, and you can get my Patriot Plus show, which is mostly oriented toward politics and news and all the stuff I can't say on YouTube. All right, well, let's get started. So last time we looked at, first of all, the origins of how Mike Allen and I came to write a Patriot's History of the United States, how we were just looking for an alternative to textbooks, that we ended up with a 2,000-page book that had to be dramatically cut down. Sentinel published it in 2004, and eventually Glenn Beck caught on to it in 2010, and it just went nuts after that. So as soon as we finished that, we started in with the introduction. And so we are in the introduction. Let me again remind you, I am using the 15th anniversary edition of Patriot's History of the United States. If you have earlier editions, they may not sync perfectly. Once we get to the main text, they will be pretty much in sync with a few exceptions. But the introduction is a little bit different because we went back and upon reflection, we thought we needed to add the 4 pillars of American exceptionalism to this entire part. So, with that said, make sure you have the 15th anniversary edition, and we'll get started. So, we're in the introduction, and the last thing I read was, in fact, America is an exceptional nation, not because its people are inherently superior, smarter, braver, or more moral, which I should add was the case with both China and Japan at the turn of the century, but because it is the only nation on earth that, from its founding, rested on the 4 pillars, as we call them, that no other nation shared, let alone had, from their origins. The first 2 pillars focus on religion and small government politics, and the second 2 are economic pillars that support the first 2. These pillars of American exceptionalism are as follows. First, the country originated in a Christian, mostly Protestant religious tradition that valued a bottom-up church governance called Congregationalism. From their first appearance in the early 1600s, Puritans believed that individual church congregations, not a church hierarchy, such as the presbytery, an archbishop, or a pope, should set local church policy. Of course, heresy, deemed as ideas that were far too outside the mainstream of Puritan thinking, was not permitted, but instead of being burned at the stake, heretics in the American colonies were simply shown the door and shoved off to another place, usually Rhode Island, as we will see. No other Protestant nation had such an origin. Not the Netherlands, not Germany, not Scandinavia, no place. The Pilgrims and the Puritans, later followed by other Congregationalists, thus instilled in the colonies, the United States, a bias toward democracy and government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So that's the first pillar of American exceptionalism, which is a Protestant religious tradition, mostly Protestant. Yes, we do have a Catholic colony later on, but that's a mostly Protestant tradition. Pillar number 2. Another factor, common law, reinforced the bottom-up structures of government. Common law originated with medieval Germans, the Germanic tribes, then gravitated to England before settlers brought it over to the colonies. It held that God put the law in the hearts of the people and that they were in turn elected or selected rulers who reflected the general will. Now, I'm not advocating Rousseau's interpretation of the general will here. It's just a kind of comment that what the people as a whole generally believed. This is in direct contrast to other European nations that followed the practice of divine right of kings, in which God placed all authority in the hands of the monarch, and the people had to act accordingly. That was a top-down form of government later cemented across Europe by Napoleon and the Napoleonic Code. Let me just comment here. Divine right of kings. You're all familiar with that. How did a king or queen, but mostly kings, how did a monarch get crowned? Well, it was the bishop, or in some cases the pope, who came up and literally placed the crown on their head. What was the symbolic nature of that? The symbolism of that? It was that God, or if you come from a Pentecostal background like I do, God, it's a 2-syllable word. Jesus in Pentecostalism is a 3-syllable word. Jesus. But anyway, you know what I mean. God put the crown on the head of the king, symbolically, right? And so all power is top down. So isn't this remarkable? In just the very first 2 pillars of American exceptionalism, which nobody else had, England at that time was still divine right of kings. They didn't get the Glorious Revolution until 1688, remember? It was only in 1688 that Parliament placed the crown on the heads of William and Mary. No other nation had the people basically investing the leaders with the authority to lead them, but we did in the colonies. So from our very origins, with a Christian, mostly Protestant religious tradition, and with common law, we began with something that no other nation on earth ever had, and to this day has ever had from its origins. England is known as a common law country. That's true. But again, at the time that they were known as a common law country, they still were practicing divine right of kings, as was virtually all of Europe. Now, yes, you can make an argument about some very small republics, like some of the Italian city-state republics, or maybe the Netherlands at times, or maybe Switzerland at times. But these are not big countries, and they don't have large populations such as we had that would really test this kind of bottom-up Republican representation, or loosely democracy. And I know how some of you feel about that. We're not a democracy, we're a republic. I get it, but I'm going to use shorthand here. That's all that is. All right, so those are the first 2 pillars. Pillar number 3, the third pillar, involves the right to own private property with written titles and deeds. Coming through English tradition in the Middle Ages, the respect for private property spread to the common man from the upper classes through written titles and deeds that were harder, though not impossible, for the monarch to ignore or violate. All you need to do here is think about the Magna Carta of 1215. What was the purpose of the Magna Carta? To ensure that the king was put on notice that all of the lands and titles that he had given to all of these nobles were in fact observed. Again, didn't mean the king couldn't take them. It just made it a little bit harder. And every impediment you put between you and the government to make it harder for the government to act on you, good deal. That's important. The more of those impediments we have, the better, which is, we'll see with our Constitution. We put a whole bunch of impediments between the federal government and the individual, from the state to the county to the city to all sorts of things. Their economic value, meaning written titles and deeds, was immense, as one's property could be used for collateral for loans, ensuring exceptional business growth not found in other parts of the world. Moreover, this pillar supported widespread respect for the law. All right, so, and I will get my videos and my images and all that stuff together. This is only my second YouTube broadcast, and OBS is a pretty complicated system. I'll get it together, but I'm going to throw out a book title here. And the book title is The Mystery of Capital by Hernando de Soto. I think this book was published around 1999, something like that. The Mystery of Capital by Hernando de Soto. And in this book, what de Soto did was he began with a question. Who has won the struggle between capitalism and communism? And his answer was clearly capitalism. Now, I know that comes as a surprise to you, given the group that's in Washington and given the faculty of most of the Ivy League colleges, but to de Soto it was obvious. Capitalism had defeated communism. He then asked the question, if that's the case, and if capitalism brings higher living standards, as we all know it does, this is irrefutable. There's almost no scholar, even Marx admitted that capitalism raises the standard of living. Then de Soto said, why are there still poor people around the world? As I like to say, the po. Why do we still have the po? Right? Some of you know what poverty is. Some of you grew up in poverty and didn't know you were poor. Right? Some of you were so poor that there were like 12 O's between the P and the R. Poor, we were poor. And you get into these arguments, you know, some of you do this all the time. If you're older, you get, oh, we are so poor, we had to walk to school one way, you know. You only walk to school one way, man, we walk both ways, 8 miles in the snow, and it accelerates, right? And then you, well, we only had a one-room house. You had a house? We only had a one-room apartment. You had an apartment? We had a shoebox. On and on, right? So what de Soto found, looking around the world in his studies, was that poorer nations, mostly in the third world, had possessions. He asked, don't they have capital possessions, stuff? Right? George Carlin did a great skit on how we all have stuff. And when you move from one house to another, you have to get rid of a whole bunch of stuff before you can move your other stuff to a new house. But then you go on vacation and you take some of your stuff with you to Las Vegas. But then you want to maybe go to the beach and you take only some beach stuff down to the beach when you go to California. Whatever it is, you're constantly moving your stuff. Don't they have stuff? And de Soto's answer was, yes, they've got stuff. They have cars, they have businesses, they have houses. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is they don't have written titles and deeds. And so de Soto showed 4 charts. One of them that I usually show at a point like this, and again, I'll get you the chart at some point, showed the number of steps it required in Cairo for a person to get the rights to develop desert land. You all know what a desert is? I live in Arizona. It's desert. You know what's in a desert? Nothing. There's nothing in a desert. It's empty. It's dirt. We got lots of dirt. It's beautiful dirt. We got some really nice cacti, but it's dirt. There's nothing there. So DeSoto looked at the steps it would take in Cairo to get access to dirt, to build something on it. And he found that it took 6 to 14 years and 150 separate government steps. Now, back in 2016, I retired from the University of Dayton after 31 years. And we knew we were going to move to Arizona. So we had already come out the previous October and found a house. And we had already purchased a second house carrying 2 mortgages. And we largely did much of that with a single realtor who brought over the documents and stacked them in front of me, sign here, initial this, initial that, sacrifice a chicken, make a blood mark here, right? One step, less than an hour. We later sold our house in Ohio. Another realtor came over, we sold that house, stack of papers, sign here, sign here. One step, 1 hour. So in 2 steps total, in 2 hours total, we had sold a house in Ohio and bought a house in Arizona. 2 steps, 2 hours, 150 hours. I'm sorry, 150, 6 to 14 years, 6 to 14 years and 150 different government steps. 6 to 14 years and 150 different government steps versus 2 steps, 2 hours. You can see why they're poor. Because the difficulty in getting titles and deeds, written titles and deeds, very important, because many African tribes have titles and deeds and nobody knows who they belong to because they're oral, the oral tradition. Recently, last 40 years, historians have, oh, the oral tradition is every bit as valid as a written tradition. No, it's not. The oral tradition is might makes right. The guy who's got the biggest voice and says this land belongs to me and he kills anybody who disagrees, he's got it. But with a written tradition, not only do you have the piece of paper, but a court somewhere, the government, has a piece of paper. And by the way, in a truly functioning capitalist society, it was long argued how many people does it take to make a market. Have you ever thought about that? How many people does it take to make a market? And the kind of traditional answer was 2, a buyer and a seller. Well, that's not really right. To have a functioning market, you need to have competition. So you need to have at least 2 buyers and 2 sellers, but you need one more thing. You need an objective referee to make sure everybody's playing by the rules, honoring the written titles and deeds, for example. So a market really requires at least 5 actors, 2 buyers, 2 sellers, and a referee. So in these other countries that have an oral tradition, there is no referee. There is no government office that has your titles and deeds on record because it's an oral tradition. That's why Africa has had a great deal of problems coming out of their tribal oral tradition. The American Indians largely had a oral tradition. So anyway, for the kids out there, this is very important to have written titles and deeds. Because most new businesses, if your parents are starting up a business, most of the time they're not going to be able to get a bank loan. Banks, love to lend you money as long as you don't need it. That's the old joke, they'll, if you got plenty of money, they're happy to lend you money. But if you need the money, they're not going to lend you the money. Why? You need something called collateral. And collateral is stuff. Remember our stuff. It's property. But one more step, you need to have a written title or deed, written proof that you own that property and can transmit it or transfer it to someone else, either in the form of a loan or in the form of collateral or in the form of a sale. Now, collateral is when you go to a bank and you say, I need money. And they say, yeah, we're happy to lend you money. What do you have as collateral? what stuff do you have that you can put up as security in case you don't pay the loan off? And you say, well, I've got this new car. Okay, that'll do. We'll take the title to your new car. See how that works? Right away, we're into the title being transferred. Now, in my ute, to quote my cousin Vinny, out here in Arizona, we had an amazing system out here. The city planners of Arizona did a lot of things right. One of the things they did was they built an airport almost right off the bat that began to make Phoenix a transportation hub and a shipping hub. But one of the other things they did very early on was to build wide roads, sort of like Salt Lake City, where Brigham Young made the roads extremely wide so you could turn a Conestoga wagon around inside a Salt Lake City road. Here they weren't thinking Conestoga wagons, they were thinking in terms of trucking. And so early on, they built really wide roads long before there were any people around to make use of those roads. But of course, we, as young drag racers, made excellent use of those roads. And we would get out and race. There's a place by Mesa Community College, you wouldn't dream that this happened today because it's total city all around this. But at the time, it was just this college out in the middle of nowhere, and at night no one was there, and you had a beautiful 5-lane road that we would use to drag race. Okay? Now, I never did this, but people would gamble on the races. They'd say, I'll put up $5 and my car can beat your... Well, sometimes the races got really higher in terms of the stakes. And there were people who raced for pink slips. That is, they would race and the winner got the title to the other guy's car, right? So when we talk about written titles and deeds, these are very important pieces of paper that transfer ownership either permanently or temporarily as collateral that allow you to get the money to build a business. So going back to Hernando de Soto's original point, why is there so much poverty? One easy answer is it's very difficult in most of these third world countries, I will use that term, to get written titles and deeds that you can build a business through collateral. Now there's a lot of other things going on, including political instability. Doesn't work too good in Lebanon if you're trying to build a car dealership and mortar shells come raining in all the time. But that's neither here nor there. Our focus here is on written titles and deeds, and that's the third pillar of American exceptionalism. The final pillar is capitalism. Now this came in 1776, we used to think, until with the publication of The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, but took until the 1790s to reach American shores. Free markets undergirded America's penchant for the protection of individual rights and the distaste for big government, in that free markets relied on individual choice, not market direction, to advance the economy. Now let me comment on this. When we wrote that, we believed that free markets came fairly late in our development. But later I found out, visiting with people from Plymouth, that in fact, in 1630, just 10 years after the colony was founded in Plymouth, they were growing so many farm goods, so much corn, whatever else, that the farmers couldn't mill their own corn. And so they made an agreement with a local farmer, I forget his name, but they made an agreement with one of their number. If you will handle the milling, we will pay you in crops for your role as the town miller. Well, this is what Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations called division of labor. This is where you have individuals exchanging goods or services, later money, because everybody specializes in something. Thank God we specialize in things. You do not want to hear me sing. You don't ever want to see me play golf. But I can write books pretty well, okay? And so everybody has a different talent or ability that other people don't have. And it's our society today has gotten to the point where if you're not equal with everybody in every single ability, that's wrong. No, it's not. It's natural. It's natural that people are not going to be the same in abilities in all things, and that some will be athletes, and some will be scientists, and some will be writers, and some will be actors, and some will be plumbers. And you need all of these things to make society work, not just one of them. One of the skews that has hit our modern society is the emphasis on a college education and so-called white-collar jobs to the expense of so-called blue-collar job or industrial work or plumbers or construction workers or car repair mechanics or any number of other things that we cannot live without. You think you can live without some of these things? You try fixing a modern car. Now, back in my day, you could pull the plugs and change the oil on something pretty easily. But these days, everything is so computerized, it's really hard to work on a modern car. So what we found was that, in fact, America had capitalism, or at least an infant form of capitalism from 1630 on in Plymouth. And so as we go along, we're going to find out that, in fact, it was Plymouth that represented true American exceptionalism, not Jamestown. Because as we're going to see, Jamestown starts off with a group of governors over in London, the London Company. And Jamestown starts off not with Puritans, but mostly with Anglicans. So right off the bat, Jamestown lacked two of the four pillars of American exceptionalism. As we'll see, it did have private property with written titles and deeds after both it and Plymouth started as socialist colonies, which we'll get into in a minute. So those are the four pillars of American exceptionalism: a Christian, mostly Protestant religious tradition, common law that is bottom up, so both of these are bottom up structures, private property with written titles and deeds that provide barriers against a dictator or ruler taking your land, and capitalism, a free market economy based on people's desires and wants and needs, not the organization and direction of a central government authority. Okay, let's continue. Taken together, these four pillars made America truly an exceptional nation among all those in the world. But there were other, less institutionalized elements that defined the American character. Consider the scene more than 200 years ago when President John Adams, just voted out of office by the hated Republicans of Thomas Jefferson, mounted a carriage and left Washington even before the inauguration. Does that remind you of somebody, maybe in President Trump? See, that wasn't anything new. There was no armed struggle, not a musket ball was fired, nor a political opponent hanged, nor anybody jailed for insurrection. There was no guillotine, no Federalist march with guns or knives in the streets. And just 4 years before that, in 1796, Adams had taken part in an equally momentous event when he won a razor-thin close election over Jefferson, and because of Senate rules, had to count his own contested ballots. When he came to the contested Georgia ballot, the great Massachusetts revolutionary, the Duke of Braintree, stopped counting. Adams sat down for a moment to allow Jefferson or his associates to make a challenge. He encouraged a challenge, unlike a certain recent vice president. Jefferson told confidants that he thought the ballots were indeed in dispute, but he would not wreck the country over a few pieces of paper. As Adams took the oath of office, he thought he heard Washington say, quote, "I am fairly out and you are fairly in. See which of us will be the happiest." Washington didn't say that, okay? Adams thought he heard Washington. He could imagine Washington saying something like that to him. So much for protecting his own interests. Washington stepped down freely and enthusiastically, not at bayonet point. He walked away from power as nearly each and every American president has done since. These giants knew that their actions of character mattered far more to the nation they were creating than mere temporary political positions. The ideas they fought for together in 1776 and debated again in 1787 were paramount. And that is what American history is truly about. Ideas. Ideas such as all men are created equal. The United States is, quote, the last best hope of earth. And America is great because it is good. Honor counted to the founding patriots such as Jefferson, Adams, Washington, and then later Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt. Character counted. Property was also important, no denying that, because with property came liberty. We will later in the colonial era get to a book by, I want to say Gordon Wood, The American Revolution as a radical movement. I'll have to get to the exact title, but it's Gordon Wood. And he makes the point that the American Revolution was radical in so many ways, and one of those ways was that a shift had occurred since about the 1750s to the 1770s, in which property came to be seen as defining liberty. A free man owned property. You could not just willfully take property from a free man. And as we will later see, this interpretation grew and expanded to include personal work, that your labor was liberty, represented liberty, that a free man had a right to his own labor, as Lincoln would later say, to eat the bread of the work of his own hands, right? So from 1750 to 1770, slowly slavery became kind of redefined because of this notion that labor is actually something that a free man possesses. And what's interesting, as Wood points out, the radicalism of the American Revolution, that's the name of the book. I knew I'd get it. Gordon Wood, The Radicalism of the American Revolution. And as Wood points out, one of the challenges to slavery started to be this notion that, hey, we all have the right to our own labor. Why don't slaves? And nothing happens fast in history. You got to, this is not the TikTok generation. Things don't happen in, 7 or 8 seconds. They happen slowly, but this is fairly fast. About 20 or 30 years, people started to realize that labor is in fact an aspect of human liberty. Hence we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which involves what? Human labor, i.e. property at a more distant step. So what you saw happening was that for the first time, industry or industriousness became a value for the elites. I'll say that again. Industry or industriousness became a value for the elites. And you go to Iberia, to Spain and Portugal, and to the Iberian countries in Latin America, industry, industriousness was a bad word because to them only the servants worked. Free people didn't work, right? And so the lazier you could look, the lazier you could act, the more important you were. I mean, think of the royals. I'm not bashing on the royals, but come on. they have to make up stuff for them to do because their life consists really of leisure. They don't work real jobs. It's the nature of their system. Again, I'm not bashing them. There's a lot of things to admire about the British royal system, but it's this notion that they are so rich they don't have to work. That working is lower class. That's something that common people do, right? But not in America. In America, beginning in the 1750s through the 1770s, a sea change of ideas occurred in which industry, making stuff, building stuff, creating stuff, got to be important, got to be a mark of a real gentleman. And so you see something astounding happening, which is by the late 1700s, planters in the South would occasionally go out and work fields with the slaves. Washington was doing this all the time. His diaries and biographies show that Washington would constantly go out with the slaves and work on making barrels, trying to make a better barrel or things like that. Why? Because industry and industriousness among Americans was something to be admired. It was something to be looked up to. And only very recently, in the last 20 years, has this really flipped to the point that hard work and industriousness and giving 100%, or as Brendan Fraser said in Bedazzled, go out there and give 110%, we give 110%. Giving everything you have, doing excellent work, which is what the Bible commands. Do it all excellently as if unto the Lord. Only in the last 20 years has this concept that has been with us for almost 250 years started to erode with the rise of these managerial classes who are, to a large degree, overeducated. And this will get back to the problems of colleges later on, but they're largely overeducated, which means that they have more talent and skill than their current job level requires or demands. So what do you do when you've done your work and there's nothing left to do? Well, you goof off. You become kind of lazy. You don't go out and see, how can I make the company better? Because you might not be compensated for that. Now, again, in the past, that wouldn't have mattered. You went out and you did it because that's what a good employee did. All right? So just kind of keep some of these ideas in mind. Even J.P. Morgan, the epitome of the so-called robber barons, insisted that, quote, the first thing is character. Before money or anything else, money cannot buy it. And he's right there. Trust. When you lose trust, you've lost it all. Where are institutions today? Poll after poll after poll says that Americans do not trust any of their institutions. The military, police, FBI, churches, they've all lost trust for a variety of reasons that we will get into over time. But for our purposes here, the important thing is once you've lost trust, it's really hard to get it back. It takes an incredible effort to prove to somebody that once you've broken their trust, you are again trustworthy. It is not surprising, then, that so many left-wing historians miss the boat and miss it and miss it and miss it to the point where they need a ferry schedule. They failed to understand that every colonial settler and every Western pioneer understood character was tied to a Christian tradition, which was then tied to liberty through a widespread acceptance of common law, and liberty to property, preserved and protected by property arrangements such as deeds, and soon by a free market economy. All four were needed for success, but character was a prerequisite because it put the law behind property agreements and it set responsibility right next to liberty. And the surest way to ensure the presence of good character was to keep God at the center of one's life, community, and ultimately the nation. Quote, separation of church and state, unquote, meant freedom to worship, not freedom from worship. It went back to that link between liberty and responsibility, and no one could be taken seriously who was not responsible to God. Quote, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. They believed those words. As colonies became independent and the nation grew, these ideas permeated the fabric of the founding documents. Despite pits of corruption that have pockmarked federal and state politics, some of them quite deep, and despite abuses of civil rights that were shocking to say the least, the concept was deeply embedded that only a virtuous nation could achieve the lofty goals set by the founders. Over the long haul, the Republic required virtuous leaders to prosper. Another reason we're in such dire straits today is very few of our leaders practice virtue. Yet virtue and character alone were not enough. It took competence, skill, and talent to build a nation. That's where property came in. With secure property rights, people from all over the globe flocked to the United States. With secure property rights, anyone could become successful, from an immigrant Jew like Lionel Cohen and his famous Lionel toy trains, to an Austrian bodybuilder, multimillionaire actor, and governor like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Carnegie arrived penniless. Ford's company went broke, and Lee Iacocca had to eat crow on national TV for his company's mistakes. Secure property rights not only made it possible for them to all succeed, but more important, established a climate of competition that rewarded skill, talent, and risk-taking. Political skill was essential too. From 1850 to 1860, the United States was nearly rent in half by inept leaders, whereas an integrity vacuum nearly destroyed American foreign policy and shattered the economy in the decades of the 1960s and early 70s, not to mention the post-2000 period. Moral, even pious men have taken the nation to the brink of collapse because they lack the skill. And some of the most skilled politicians in the world, Henry Clay, Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, left legacies of frustration and corruption because their abilities were never wedded to character. Throughout much of the 20th century, there was a subtle and at times obvious campaign to separate virtue from talent, to divide character from success. The latest in this line of attack is the emphasis on diversity, that somehow merely having different skin shades or national origins makes America special. But it was not the color of the skin of the people who came here that made them special. It was the content of their character. America remains a beacon of liberty, not merely because its institutions have generally remained strong, its citizens free, and its attitudes tolerant, but because it, among most of the developed world, still cries out as a nation, character counts. Personal liberties in America are genuine because of the character of honest judges and attorneys, who, for the most part, still make up the judiciary, and because of the personal integrity of large numbers of local, state, and national lawmakers. Again, since we wrote this, 2019, well, we wrote it in 2018, it's faded a lot. No society is free from corruption. The difference is that in America, corruption is viewed as the exception and not the rule. And when light is shone on it, corruption is usually viciously attacked. Freedom still attracts people to the fountain of hope that is America, but freedom alone isn't enough. Without responsibility and virtue, freedom becomes a soggy anarchy, and incomplete licentiousness. This is what has made Americans different. Their fusion of freedom and integrity endows Americans with their sense of right, often when no other nation in the world shares that perception. Yet that is as telling about other nations as it is about our own. Perhaps it is that as Americans, we alone remain committed to both the individual and the greater good, to personal freedoms and to public virtue, to human achievement and to respect for the Almighty. Slavery was abolished because of the dual commitment to liberty and virtue, neither capable of standing without the other. Some crusades in the name of integrity have proven disastrous, including prohibition. The most recent serious threats to both liberty and public virtue, abuse of the latter damages both, have come in the form of modern environmental and consumer safety movements. Attempts to sue gun makers, paint manufacturers, tobacco companies, even Microsoft for the public good have made distressingly steady advances encroaching on Americans' freedoms to eat fast foods, smoke, or modify their automobiles, not to mention start businesses or invest in existing firms without fear of retribution. And I think in here we could begin to discuss vaccines. By the early 21st century, a New York mayor had attempted to ban soft drinks over a certain size. Remember Mayor Bloomberg trying to ban big gulps? San Francisco had waged a war on plastic bags, and elementary schools across the nation had prohibited everything from soccer balls to doing cartwheels, all in the name of public safety. Many, particularly foreigners and especially America's enemies, came to view this as a weakness and sissification. The founders, each and every one of them, would have been horrified at such intrusions on liberty regardless of the virtue of the cause, not because they were elite white men, but because such actions in the name of public good were simply wrong. It all goes back to character. The best way to ensure virtuous institutions, whether government, business, schools, or churches, was to populate them with people of virtue. We have this saying, personnel is policy. It doesn't matter what your policies are if you don't put people in government who will carry out those policies. You don't have policies. And President Trump found this out to some degree, right? Europe forgot this in the 19th century. By World War I at the latest, during righteous and punitive face-saving traditions in the Middle East or Asia, these twin principles of liberty and virtue have never been adopted. Only in America, where one was permitted to do almost anything but expected to do the right thing, did these principles germinate. Folks, put your shopping carts back. You want to do a little virtuous act? Do the right thing. Put your shopping cart back. Don't leave it out there to be blown in the wind into somebody else's car, right? I mean, it's little stuff like this. Preacher Joyce Meyer said, you aren't going to have control over the devil if you don't have control over a sink of dirty dishes. Okay? Take control virtuously of the little things in your life. Throw your garbage away. Okay? Clean up after yourself. Little things. To a great extent, this is why on March 4th, 1801, John Adams would have thought of nothing other than to turn the White House over to his hated foe without fanfare, self-pity, or complaint, and return to his everyday life away from politics. That is why on the few occasions where very thin electoral margins produced no clear winner in the presidential race, such as 1824, 1876, 1888, 1960, and 2000, the losers, after some legal maneuvering and recounting of votes and occasional whining, nevertheless stepped aside and congratulated the winner of the different party. Adams may have set a precedent, but in truth, he would do nothing else. After all, he was a man of character. So that ends our session on Patriots history for today. Next time we will start up with chapter 1, verse 1 of the book of Schweikart and Allen, Patriots History of the United States. I hope you enjoyed this. Remember, check out Patriots History and other books at thewildworldofhistory.com. We have all the books there. I have master classes for adults in U.S. and world history. We have full curricula for high school students. Some 8th graders have used this course. I wouldn't recommend it for 8th graders, but I have had a lot of 8th graders use it. In U.S. history, all 22 chapters tied to Patriots history, with me teaching every chapter in high production video. World history since 1775, tremendous look at everybody from Gandhi to Napoleon to Marx to Bolivar to just everybody. It's a great course. All of these come with teacher's guides, student guides, tests. All the images that I use in my videos, you can download those. No license to expire, folks. If you've got 5 kids coming up, one's in high school now, but the rest are on their way, you can use the course with all 5 kids. There's no license to expire. You can use it with multiple kids. If you've got one child of your own and 2 neighbor kids, you want to do it together, you can do it. I ask if you go more than 5 per lesson, you buy a second lesson, but that's up to you. So check out the Wild World of History. We also have a great VIP subscription side. For $6 a month, you can get incredible stuff, ongoing lessons in Reagan, the American president, the horrible history of Howard Zinn, the 1620 default, why the 1619 project is wrong, enduring lessons on life and citizenship. You want that for your kids. I teach you the connection between time and money. I teach you in 5 to 8 minutes communism versus capitalism in ways you've never heard it before. You want to check out the VIP. And if none of that floats your boat, we have a link somewhere around here to buy Larry a coffee. I'll take all the coffee I can drink. All right, folks, I will not be here Friday because I will be at a homeschool convention, so we will pick up with a Patriots history on Monday with Chapter 1. And I'll see you then.